Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. Currently in Hearthstone Standard metagame, Frost Death Knight is by far the best deck. Actually, Frost Death Knight no longer has any weaknesses. Frost Death Knight used to have one weakness in Evolved Shaman, but that was when Evolved Shaman could still discover Neptulon from their Blazing Transmutation, and now that that was changed, the bug was fixed so that Colossals cannot be discovered from that, then that pushed Evolved Shaman down a little bit, just the tiniest of little bits, but just enough that Frost Death Knight no longer has any weaknesses. Then right behind Frost Death Knight and Evolved Shaman there's Unholy Death Knight, also doing extremely well, and also Blood Death Knight is doing pretty well, although Blood Death Knight has multiple weaknesses. It just happens to be strong against some of the decks that are at the top right now, and that's why it's playable, even though there are plenty of decks that could challenge it, but they are just completely oppressed by Frost Death Knight, Evolved Shaman and Unholy Death Knight. So we need some balance changes. I mean, Frost Death Knight doesn't have a single bad matchup, and that is an untenable situation. So how can we change this? The card that is by far the best card in every single Frost Death Knight deck is Construct Quarter. Incidentally, it's also a great card in Unholy Death Knight, so by nerfing this card we could nerf both of those archetypes at the same time. So that's a very attractive proposition. But how would you nerf Construct Quarter? 3-mana location, destroy a friendly minion to summon a 4/5 undead with Rush, 3 uses. Obviously people have been talking about, hey, what about putting 2 uses to this? 2 uses wouldn't do much, because if you get to do a couple of 4/5 undeads with Rush, that's typically already enough to win the game. Then there's an opportunity to change the mana cost, it could cost 4. There's the opportunity to change the stats, 4/4, 3/4. There's a few alternatives. What do we know about statistics? About statistics we know that here is the win rate graph of Construct Quarter being played on various turns. And as you can see, when Construct Quarter hits the board on turn 2 or turn 3, it is just devastating. It's absolutely devastating. Turn 4, turn 5, it's still very, very strong. And then if it comes turn 6 or later, then it starts to be a little bit too late. It doesn't really do much at that point. So obviously, I mean, Blizzard usually wants to nerf cards by increasing their mana cost. Sometimes they have nerfed locations by decreasing the durability, but this kind of indicates that decreasing the durability of Construct Quarter would not have the desired effect, because it's so important. When it hits the board early, it just already did its thing. I mean, if it does it 2 or 3 times, that just won't make a difference. So nerfing it to 4 mana obviously would prevent it from being played on turn 2. Then turn 3 it would only be available on coin, so it would also be much more difficult to get it out on turn 3. And that probably would already solve this. The other alternative, changing the stats of the undead, yeah, that might also help, but even if we're talking about like Foul Egg into Coin Quarter, into a 3/3 and a 3/4 with Rush on turn 2, that's already quite devastating. So actually, having thought about it, first I thought that stat nerf might be the thing, but after looking at these statistics, I'm beginning to think that actually Construct Quarter to 4 mana would be the solution to Death Knight. And then we have Evolved Shaman. Well, Evolved Shaman's best performing card is the Goldshire Gnoll. 10 mana, Rush, 5/4 cost 1 less for each other card in your hand. You play that, you evolve that with various ways. First and foremost nowadays, the Blazing Transmutation. 1 mana, choose a minion, discover one that costs 1 more to transform it into. How do you change Shaman? Shaman was already strong before the miniset, and the miniset gave them the Transmutation. So we know that Shaman without the Transmutation is a playable deck. And on the other hand, if you nerf the Gnoll, like if you make Gnoll 11 mana, for example, so that you can no longer evolve it into anything meaningful, then that just completely kills the deck. I'm all for it. I would love to see that. That would be wonderful. But Blizzard typically doesn't nerf things in that way in this game anymore. So if they don't nerf the Gnoll, then they would probably have to touch the Blazing Transmutation. They already did that once, because on Friday Blizzard fixed the bug that you could discover Colossals from Blazing Transmutation, and as it happens, Neptulon the Tidehunter was by far the best discover that you could make from Blazing Transmutation, resulting in 74.3% win rate when you manage to do that. Just boom. Thaddeus is the second best 10-drop that you can get, and the Stoneborn General is the third best. But right now, with Neptulon out of the pool, it's less likely that you can get one of these really big 10 drops, so Blazing Transmutation has already become a little bit weaker. Then there's the question of like Blazing Transmutation on something else than the null. Then Blazing Transmutation most likely is going to be used on tiny toys, and then you discover a 6-drop, and typically people like to discover like No Muncher. But Blazing Transmutation on tiny toys just isn't all that. It just isn't nearly as effective as Blazing Transmutation on an early null. So if Blizzard doesn't want to kill Evolve Shaman by nerfing the null directly, then touching Blazing Transmutation with the null could help. And that hypothesis is also corroborated by this data, win rate of Blazing Transmutation depending on when it is played. And hey, if you can play your Blazing Transmutation on your null on turn 2, you win almost 85% of the time. Who would have thought? Then if you play it on turn 3, it's only a little bit weaker, turn 4 a little bit weaker, and so on. And the longer the game goes on, the weaker the effect of Blazing Transmutation. So this is actually a fairly clear-cut case where increasing the mana cost of Blazing Transmutation to 2 would mean that you cannot do that turn 2 Blazing Transmutation. The highest of the high rolls are completely eliminated, and otherwise it's still a playable card, but it doesn't cause Evolve Shaman to be quite as oppressive anymore. So yeah, Blizzard, hey, they like to nerf stuff by increasing the mana cost, and according to statistics, right now it looks like with both Construct Carder and with Blazing Transmutation, increasing the mana cost would actually be a pretty important nerf, because both of them benefit greatly when they're played as early as possible. So yeah, that's basically it. I have tried to look into all of the meta decks, into the various relationships between the meta decks, and if you nerf Frost Death Knight, Evolve Shaman, and Unholy Death Knight, everyone else has multiple weaknesses already. So if those 3 decks become vulnerable to a bunch of decks, then the rest of the meta should be able to balance itself out. So actually, we're quite close. We're surprisingly close to a healthy metagame here. Right now we're in a very unhealthy position, because Frost Death Knight doesn't have a single bad matchup, but overall we're not far. Just 2 cards. 2 cards. Nerf 2 cards, Blizzard, and we could be good. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members, and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.